Hi Pokercode community, what's up? Matthias here, and today it's a little heads up for you. It's going to be a tricky hand, it's going to be multi-way, it's going to be deep, very connected board. So let's jump into it and get ready for the action. Action starts with Malinowski opening, I call in position in the cutoff, and the big blind comes along in the hand as well. Freeway on the flop, I flop amazing, I would say. Action goes check check to me, so of course I want to get value out of this hand. Bet something like 35%, size is not that important, and the big blind calls, and Malinowski immediately folds. So the first thing that we should keep in mind is, this spot is different than just cutoff against the big blind. Why is it different? If I bet on the flop into two players, my range will be stronger than if I was just c-betting cutoff against the big blind. This is the first thing. I have the stronger range, and what is the consequence of him? It means that the big blind will defend significantly tighter in the big blind, because he has actually a lot more problems on the flop. On the flop, he knows, well, I will have a stronger range here, so he cannot defend his normal defending range, and his even bigger problem is that there is still the initial raiser behind, who can have a lot of strong hands here. This is not the board where he's going to c-bet a lot, so he can have all hands still, he can have sets, he can have overpairs, he is really pretty uncapped here. So have that in mind for if you put your opponent on the range here. He will have not any 5 deuce of diamonds bottom range calls or whatever. In this spot he will give this bet and the player behind a lot more respect, and therefore his defending range is a lot tighter. So this is a very important info to keep in mind. So now when he calls and the player behind folds, we really know that he probably connects very good to the 7. What he called on the flop is he still called a lot of flush draws, especially flush draws with like additional equity. He calls, I still think that he calls strong straight draws like Jack 9 and so we know that the 7 is really good for him overall. Flush completing, straight completing. If he had hands like 9-8 suited or 8-7 suited, they complete, so turn really good for him. He identified that correctly and lead here, because he identified that the turn card is so good for him that he can work with leads. This is correct, and let's see what we are facing. He starts with a small lead. Even though there's a good chance I'm actually not ahead anymore, of course I'm not going to fold. I call top 2 pair, and the river is very tricky. For 2 reasons. I want to name those 2 reasons to you, of course. Let's see what's happening. Okay, he takes a long think here, considering what to do, and he ends up checking. I must say that maybe there is a timing tell if somebody thinks like too long, or... But anyway, I didn't pay attention on that. So the thing is, when he checks here, then first of all, let me take a look at this spot and think about how it should be played in a perfect environment, right? And I think given that the action starts freeway, that he will have a very strong calling range on the flop, that the straight arrives, that the flush arrives, that everything arrives, I think my hand is a check back, even though I have top 2 pair. And even though he checked to me, a lot of the flush, a lot of the straights, he would bet at this point on the river still. But even though that he checks to me, I still think my hand is probably a check back. Argument number 2, however, is that I think that opponents are a little bit too unbalanced. What do I mean with that? I think that if he has a flush, he would bet it almost every single time. And even if he has a straight, he would probably bet it almost every single time, especially with the 9x straight. So There now I'm thinking, I don't think he's balanced enough here. He's supposed to have some flush in this spot. He's supposed to have some straights in this spot. The solver always pays a lot of attention on like balancing, finding the perfect checking frequencies for each hand to not be exploitable in any way, right? And I think that's a pretty hard for humans. So on one hand I thought, okay, this hand is probably a check back in the solver, but also I think my opponent just doesn't have that many strong hands, and maybe I can still go for a greedy value bet. And all in all, I run it in the solver. I wanted to know, is it maybe a little bit mixed? Is it a pure check back on the river, or how is the EV of a bet? I can also check out, is it a close, even though it's checking, for example, I can see, is the EV of the check and of the bet rather close? Can I make this exploit and bet here? And I have to say the answer is that even if we have a set here, we should check it back. And I think that also answers the question with this set. So in the solver, as I just said, a set is supposed to check back. That does not mean that I think you should check back a set. I still think that a set should be a value bet against almost everyone, for the reason that I explained, that he will not be balanced enough. He will not check enough flushes, he will not check enough straights. But if in theory even a set should be a check back, that also means even with an exploit, this hand does not make it into a bet. So this is a pretty clear check back in this, and I was putting like too much attention on this possible exploit. This is something I should probably refrain doing against very good racks, that I go too much into the exploit direction. I think it's more likely that it like backfires and I get punished compared to a strong exploit working out. And actually, as we can see, I really got punished here. He made a big check raise, and of course I cannot call it down at this point. And now I lost the hand, and I think we had so much information in this hand. It started on the flop, how his defend range changes a lot. As a consequence, ranges are a lot stronger on the turn, especially his range. It enables him to lead on that turn. That is incredibly good for his range, and that all in all also ends as a consequence that I'm supposed to give a lot of respect on the river, even though that he checks, and I'm supposed to check back 2-pair, and in theory I'm even supposed to check back sets, which I probably would not do in game, but this hand, as mentioned, mandatory check back. I wanted to share this takeaway with you so that you can take it into account when you face multi-way decisions.